Welcome back to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, December 22nd, 2016. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani, back inside our New York City studio. Happy holidays. Thank you for joining us on this last show of 2016. And this, truth be told, is one of my favorite episodes of the year because we look back at the year that was, look ahead a little bit to the year to come, 2017. But before we get to that, we have a lot to discuss as it pertains to right now in the world of MMA, so let's get right to it. Also good news, the A-Team is back. It's been a while, guys. Good to see you, especially you, Slacker. Yeah. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, and of course, that is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post. Chuck Mindenhall, of course, of MMAfighting.com as well. Okay, guys, let's talk about UFC 207. It's 8 days away, not 9 days. It's on a Friday night, December 30th. It, of course, features the return of Ronda Rousey against Amanda Nunes. There's a lot to talk about here, but I just want to start with this. 8 days away from Ronda Rousey's long-awaited, much-anticipated return. Does this feel like a big deal? Does it feel as big as it should?
To us, I think it does. I don't know how far it's reached into the outer world of the casual fan base rings of Saturn, as it were. Like, if you're just talking about us here, we are definitely sort of thinking about all the different questions. It's been a year of questions. It's been a year of uncertainty and cloudiness. And so I'm looking for the resolution of that, not this Friday, but the following. But I'm sort of reaching out, I'm like asking my other friends who have interest in MMA, did you know Rousey was fighting? Oh yeah, I know it's happening soon, right? Like they have a vague idea about it. But I think we talked about this before the show, do they know it's on Friday? I'm not so sure. I think here's the truth. There is a gap that's missing because Rousey's not really promoting in a way that a typical headliner should, or I should say, historically has. And so as a consequence, it's definitely a big deal. I just don't have a strong sense that it's really begun to penetrate the mainstream. That said, it could pick up steam late.
So Chuck, there's this story that's been coming out that she's not doing a lot of media, that she doesn't want to talk to the MMA media. But it is important to note, she has done Ellen, she has done Conan. Those are two
Weeks ago,
yeah. Fair. And we don't know what's to come as far as big media in the next 8 or so days. Do you think that it negatively, honestly, does it negatively impact the buy rate, the buzz leading up to the fight if she doesn't talk to the rank and file MMA media? If she just chooses the big dogs, so to speak, the mainstream, is that enough, or does she have to speak to the fans via the MMA media?
I mean, in my mind, she does, because that's what she has traditionally done. It's interesting to go into this a hype game with the word downplay at the front of it, because I feel like that's what she's doing, downplaying this big event, and it's unique. I mean, it's one of those situations that I kind of go back and forth on. It actually kind of angers me a little bit when I start to hear that she's, blocking off media, because we're supposed to, I guess it's because I feel like we're being, like the media in general is shouldering some of the blame for her downfall, or is being meant to, if that's how it's being portrayed. I just find that sort of absurd, because you've heard Dana White on Colin, I think it was on Colin's show, he's saying like, this is the media and all this, and there's this idea that we've turned on her, or the media has turned on her or something. It is not, it's one of those things that really, it becomes bothersome and irksome to me that would even become the case. You know what I mean? Now, if she wanted to internally be like, I don't want to do media and all that, and it's not going to come out that that's the reason, fine. But I find it really weird that you're basically, it's the fight game. It's a hype game. I mean, to say like, I don't really care about the media, I don't want to talk to media, I'm not talking to media, and then to put like a gag order essentially onto her team to not talk to media, it's befuddling to me. I don't really understand that. So that part of it, I don't really get. And in terms of like the overall, like how is it being perceived? I feel like it's being perceived way less than normal. I mean, going into UFC 193, I heard about her fight. It seemed like for a month leading up to, or maybe not, but I'm saying it's like, it felt like it was a big buildup. Everybody thought that Holly Holm was going to get beat, but it was a bigger buildup. And here's this one where you have all these questions, and I feel like it's kind of just on a very low flame.
Sick of her.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I have an opposite reaction to you guys. I don't really care whether she talks to people. I mean, I feel as though one of the things that got her beat was spreading herself too thin. And she was doing movies, and she was doing TV, and she was all over the place. And
didn't say that you spread yourself too thin. The fact that she's actually actively saying, like, that the media had some, you know what I mean? Like, it's her choice to do that. It's her choice, and it's her choice not to. But I'm like, don't make the media shoulder the blame for that.
Yeah, that stuff doesn't affect me because I don't really listen to it. I mean, I would encourage any fans out there to take anything that comes out of the mouth of Dana White talking about these fights, or any of the lapdog media members who just go out there and repeat whatever Ronda says, that's all promotional nonsense, and I would encourage any fans just to ignore that stuff. The bottom line is Ronda Rousey hasn't fought since she got knocked out by Holly Holm. Now she's coming back. She's coming back with a vengeance. She, from all the little drips and drabs of what we're getting, it seems like she's in great shape and she's ready to fight, and she's putting all of her attention on that and not too much attention on media. Even the mainstream stuff that you mentioned happened a while ago. She's not been even, if she was just going a different direction and appearing on Conan or Ellen's show this week or last week, it'd be different. But she seems to be putting herself away from that stuff, and all she's focusing on is the fight. And maybe that will make the promotion suffer, but I think it's going to make her fight better.
It's not British royalty. We shouldn't be handling white glove scenario in a fight game. Fight game is, you know what I mean? Our idea that she may have an injured psyche is part of the conversation of this. That is the whole story. If you're closing us out, that's fine, but it only feeds that, right? But it's only going to feed the idea that that's happening. But to actually gag order the people around her or whoever's putting this on, I don't know if it's UFC or whatever, we have a right to know what Edmund Tarverdyan should be answering. He has a lot to answer to, not just in, that's just specifically towards the fight. He's her coach. Who's going to be a mouthpiece to tell you what tweaks are going on in the camp and everything else that is going on? I find the whole thing very strange because it's a fight game thing and it's a hype game thing, and they're taking the opposite tact on it. To me, it doesn't make sense.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't feel as though these people have an obligation to share anything. I mean, maybe it's. Despite the fact that I'm a Giants fan, I live in New England, and so perhaps I live under the regime of Bill Belichick. But those people, they don't share any information about anything.
Yeah, but we have a responsibility to ask.
We have a responsibility to ask, and if they want to answer, great. And if they don't, then we write about things.
They do show up. He does show up. He may not say anything.
I will. Right. And people either quote that or they do their own thing. I will write a preview, and all of us will do some form of preview of this fight, and we will acknowledge it, and we will analyze what's going to happen. And the words that are coming out of the mouth of Ronda Rousey or Edmund or anybody else who's part of that team, I mean, they could be relevant in that they may amplify the story, but that's not the story. The story is, what is Ronda Rousey going to do in the octagon a week from tomorrow?
But does this tell you a little bit about what's to come, what you should expect?
Not necessarily. She could. I mean, pictures have leaked out here and there. She looks to be in tremendous shape. She might go in there and beat the brakes off Amanda Nunes.
Also, when she was on Conan, you could tell she looked.
So I don't think it's necessarily. Look, it could end up being an indicator of how things go in the cage, but I think it's way too early to tell. She could go in there and look great. But for me, I guess I kind of split the difference a little bit on whether she should or shouldn't talk to the media. But for me, it just doesn't make sense, their angle. The UFC, right? They put this promo out that's like Amanda Nunes. I mean, I'm not asking for equal time.
Sure.
She's basically not in there at all.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just about Rousey. But Rousey has abdicated, or at least negotiated out, her responsibility to promote this. So how does this work? It'd be one thing if Rousey was in the void, doing what she wanted to do, and Amanda Nunes was barking at her constantly, and the UFC was featuring this, almost like quiet Aldo McGregor. Not quite, but you get the idea. Yeah. But both are missing.
Yeah.
One intentionally and one inadvertent, or maybe it's advertent. I don't know exactly how you want to describe it. And so for me, to answer your question about, like, should she talk to the media? Partly, if they talk to someone like you or another big person, and maybe Kevin Iola or something, it can bubble up to the surface. So there's value there in getting a wider distribution of the story out. But for me, it's like, I don't even understand the UFC's tactic here. You are allowing one person to silence themselves and then not doing anything to feature the other person, so it's just all quiet on the Western front.
Champion.
I would see, to speak to Luke's point, I would say then that what Ronda Rousey is doing is a disservice to the UFC, but not to us. I feel as though we can still write about, analyze this fight as much as we want to, and the words that she speaks, yeah, of course it'll flesh out the story, but we've all gone and we've all talked to fighters before fights. What we get out of the fighters is minimal, really, and really what the gold is what they're going to do, how they're going to perform, analyzing what they can do, what they can't do. From our end, yeah, I know it's an inconvenience to not be able to talk to the fighters. But if she's cheating anybody, she's cheating the people that are paying her paycheck.
I could care less if we talk to her or not. I really don't care. The bottom line is that the bottom.
You don't like being blamed?
Well, I mean, I feel like that's the thing that I don't like is the fact that we kind of put it on that we've turned on, like the media turned on her and all this stuff. That bothers me. If you're not going to give us, the media a chance to actually talk about it, unless you're going to go do these little puff, interviews with Ellen or something like that, that's bothersome. You're like, it feels. I don't like to use the word cowardice, but there's this cowardice surrounding some of this because it's not fun anymore to cover even Travis Brown. I'm talking about the larger faction. When all of a sudden you feel like, well, he's in a bad mood straight off the bat because of the Rousey stuff. You even mentioned the Rousey stuff, it's going to be a bad mood. To me, this is like you're starting to mute a part of the fight game. It's just really weird. And I don't like the idea that the media is to blame for any of this. I just feel like it's the media's job to ask these questions. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know. I could care less ultimately. I could care less.
Do you take it in? I mean, I hear that stuff and it just rolls off my back.
Until we get closer, it bothers me more. I really don't. I don't know. To me, it's just bothersome that the media has been cast like we're something to blame in this.
It's also important to note that the UFC is 100% on board with this. This is not like she's telling them, I'm not doing this, and they're getting upset. This is not Conor Dana 2, so to speak. Also important to note that she is represented by the owners of the UFC at this point. Right. They are on board, yes. And you talk about white gloves, that's their client. Sure. They're going to treat her maybe a little different. If you're Amanda Nunes, two things. Joe Rogan, much credit to him, UFC employee, puts out on Twitter. It's one thing for us to say, it's another for him to say it. This is bizarre that they are not featuring her. If you're Amanda Nunes, you look at this promo and you also recognize the fact that your opponent is represented by the owner of the company. Do you feel uneasy? And I'm not suggesting any foul play, but it's like, I'm the champ. Do you feel uneasy? Like you're in the back of your mind, you might be thinking deep down inside, they want me to lose. Dana White has come out and said, this is my friend, I care for her. He doesn't do that with other fighters. Do you feel weird going into Vegas? And maybe that's why, and I'd love to talk to Amanda. I tried to get her on my show on Monday, but she was not feeling well. Maybe that's why she's like, look, I'm not going to play any games here. I'm just going to show up, fight, knock her head off, whatever. But it's a weird spot for Amanda Nunes. This is the first time since the sale to WME IMG, and I know Chris Weidman kind of works with them a little bit, but they're not his representation. I know John Jones as well, but he hasn't fought. This is the first time that Ronda Rousey has fought since the sale. She's a client of theirs. If you're Amanda Nunes, it's a weird feeling, no?
I think I had a chance to speak to her the day of that face-off she had. Okay. So I guess the day of the weigh-ins or something.
205.
Spoke to her that day. We talked about like what she thought about Rousey walking off and all that kind of stuff. But I got the sense from talking to her, and Nina Ansaroff was there too, that she is still kind of in this honeymoon phase of being the champion.
Is that bad?
No, I think it's actually quite good.
Okay.
I think it actually, to answer your question, she's not like Nate Diaz, who, whatever you make of his claims, it felt to me like he had an axe to grind, that he had poured over these complaints and this frustration over a long period of time. I think she's still almost, and I mean this complimentary, almost like blissfully ignorant.
Beautiful.
Like she just is focused on the task at hand. She's still thrilled to be the champion. What I wonder is if she beats Rousey, then you might hear some of these complaints. But I think she also is probably a little bit nervous about win the belt, never defend it.
Or if Rousey beats her.
Or if Rousey beats her, right.
After the fact, she might bring this up.
She might bring it up. But I think right now, maybe she's internalizing it, not discussing it. But from every discussion I've had with her, she doesn't even seem to be aware necessarily of some of these concerns. I'm sure on some level she is. She's not a stupid person.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to be quite so forward with her or whatever she wants to talk about publicly.
And let me be crystal clear, and I'll look into this camera, and I think I speak for all of us. We are not pleading for Ronda Rousey to talk to us. I know people will be like, look at these pathetic media members begging. Our lives will go on. We didn't get to talk to Conor at 205. We didn't get to talk to him at 202. It's okay. We're all. I think we're just sort of trying.
Record numbers, by the way.
We're just trying to figure out. At least I am, and I think you guys are as well. What does it say about the state of Ronda Rousey going to this fight when not only A, is she not talking to us, but B, her team isn't allowed to talk to us?
Also, Chuck, this is so aberrant. This is aberrant behavior. Every other champion, when they lose, they might take a media hiatus. They might go to Mexico and Cancun and kick their feet up and drink shots with Gilbert Melendez on their boat or with T-Pain. I don't know. To do this, to have this kind of sabbatical and then have this omerta around everyone is highly aberrant behavior. Yeah. It would be irresponsible to not ask what is happening here. I don't know how you can disagree with that.
Right.
The story is, I mean, what has been the story all year is like maybe she's got this fragile psyche. Maybe we had her dialed in wrong. There's all kinds of things that go into it, and I guess that's still the story. And then you get to this moment, and you think like you're going to keep putting forth those narratives because that's really where we're at. I mean, we're at the same spot we're at. I guess you wanted some clarity in that. I don't know. I think it's just a little frustrating just the way she's been. And I guess as we get closer, that it just comes out more so.
I feel like this gives us more clarity than we would have if she just got trotted out for some kind of, Jerry Lewis-like interview. Of just like answering questions.
That would do her favors.
If she were just answering questions because it was her obligation to answer questions, it would be different. I feel as though all the stuff you're just talking about, it feeds into that narrative that we've been building over the past year, really, and that's
it's
okay.
Just a dark cloud because if you can't speak to Edmonds Arvadian, you can't speak to Travis Brown about anything. Like who are you supposed? It's all guesswork.
Like Dolce.
Yeah, like Dolce.
Yeah,
you're not allowed to. I mean,
who are people who support her? Like they'll never say anything against her. Now her mom may be a different story.
That seems vindictive in a way that I just don't think is justified. You know what I mean? That's all it was. That's what it seems like to me.
Okay, and what about this promo?
Yeah, I wanted to say something about that.
I love this, Chuck. Where have you been? This is incredible. Dude,
I missed a couple shows.
In the pants.
I love it. Please,
come on.
Go ahead. The floor is yours.
It never got to me when we were talking about
Go ahead, please.
It's an interesting scenario with her, obviously, because it's almost like the creation quandary, right? The chicken and egg. She's like the Beatles, right? And then Amanda Nunes is like Sgt. Pepper. She's a standalone record that was a masterpiece, maybe on her own, but the artist still created her. You know, it's like it was Ronda Rousey who broke through the whole thing and put women's sport where it's at. So the promo is heavily, tended towards her. I get it. It's like it's the most unique situation you can have in terms of that because she's coming back from this whole thing, and you're like, you're going to do that. Amanda Nunes would have never pushed that narrative through, and the way it's changed hands so many times, but she would have never been able to do, streak across the sky for 2 years and basically steal every headline in the MMA world and basically drive up the value of the UFC in that process. I mean, Amanda Nunes is never going to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like you're looking at a star who's, I didn't really like the promo, but I'm like, I understood that they were trying to make it more
but how about
centric
this? Like that promo, in my opinion, is everything that it isn't. Excuse me. It is not. You know what made that 193 promo so great? You remember the 193 one where it's like the two little girls, her and Holly Holm, and you see them coming up, and she's in the gym and she's looking at BJ Penn, and they all come together. And I don't know if it was equal time. I never broke it down, but at the end, it got you emotionally invested in who Holly Holm was. And let's be honest, Holly Holm was no different than Amanda Nunes, and her UFC career was less impressive than Amanda Nunes. She wasn't coming off a win at UFC 200 over Miesha Tate, a title victory win, like a dominant win over Miesha Tate. Holly Holm had a couple of, ho-hum fights against Marion Renault and Raquel Pennington, but they built her up. And then when she won, it meant something. You have to at least come to terms with the fact that Amanda Nunes could very well win this fight. And if you do absolutely no promotion of her leading up to the fight, what are you left with afterwards? If Ronda Rousey loses this fight, it could be very well the last time she fights in the UFC. She has said this herself. So why would you not at least shine a bit of spotlight? I know that Ronda is the story, but shine a bit of spotlight on Amanda Nunes, who has a great story as well. She has a fantastic story. She came from nothing, and she has defied the odds, and look where she is. You got to tell us about her as well.
To extend Chuck's metaphor, I would prefer just to let it be, because
wow.
Because I mean, we're talking about how the UFC sells fights, and I don't really give a damn about how the UFC sells. I don't care if they make $1 billion on this fight card, or if they make a small fraction of that. To me, what's important is how the kind of fights they put out there. They've got a really good card with several really good fights, and this one at the top of the card could be a really good fight, or it could be back to normal for Ronda, going right back out there and smashing somebody in seconds, or she could go out there and lose, and that's the last we see of her. All that stuff's important, but I don't know, the way that they choose to sell it is not that interesting to me. That's like the.
It's so interesting to me.
I know.
I love it. I love it. It's part of the fight game.
Here's one of the reasons why this is important, if not for the reasons of the conflict of interest that you could raise. But let's just talk about the ad itself, right? Which is basically doing all the yeoman's work at this point, because Ronda's not doing anything else, and neither is Amanda apparently. So all we have is this ad floating out in the nether region. So. It's not a zero-sum game up to a point. In other words, I had people telling me like, well, what if they put Amanda in there, no one cares about Amanda. You got to keep Ronda there to sell everything. It's like, dude, you don't get it. You can subtract a little bit of Ronda. You can put in Amanda, and you don't lose anything.
No.
It's not an either or. Now, of course, if it was 90% Amanda, 10% Ronda, okay, the equation changes a little bit. But this idea that it's a zero-sum game about promoting her is just factually inaccurate. More to your point, you're talking about somebody who, from nothing, from absolutely nothing in Bahia, Brazil, she comes over here, learns English, gets better, is a BJJ black belt, is an openly gay champion. Like, this is an incredible story of immigrant success. And she can do it in a couple of languages. And there is nothing. There is nothing out there to tell that story. And if she goes in there and beats the brakes off Ronda Rousey, you have no pivot point. I just don't get it.
But I don't need the UFC to tell that story. You know, I have.
But it
I have.
doesn't-
UFC's customers
I have.
need the UFC
I have.
Yes,
I have
yes.
800 words in the Washington Post next week, and I get to tell that story. And you have, you know, whatever amount of words you're going to be. And you get to tell that you get tons of words. You've got radio. You've got an entire. You could talk about that. Those stories still exist. The UFC is choosing to go with their big
It doesn't
star.
raise eyebrows?
Well, yeah, of course. Partly because of what you mentioned about them having ownership or having a business relationship that goes beyond her fight contract. That she's represented by the owners of the UFC. That stuff is interesting, but that's all stuff that can be. That could be, you know, deciphered in our in media coverage, in real media coverage. I guess I just these promos. I mean, I know that they're targeting a certain audience, and it's just not interesting to me. What they put in, what they don't.
Okay, so on the flip side, you have Dominic Cruz and Cody Garbrandt, who I think have done a fantastic job of selling their fight. From the, you know, as awkward as it may have been, as sort of disjointed as it was with the censoring, I thought the thing on Fox was fun. I mean, it got them airtime, and it showed that there's some real bad blood there, and people love that sort of thing. And, you know, they do all the media. I mean, I think we've all talked to Dominic and Cody and all that stuff. I think that they've done a great job, and they should be commended. Like Kane Verdum, I haven't seen much from those guys. Dillashaw has done his part, but Cody and Dominic, I really think have actually carried the load going into this fight. Do you guys agree?
I completely agree. Both of those guys are pros when it comes to doing media, by the way.
Yeah.
I told the story before. I think it's worth repeating. I remember the fight, Demetrius Johnson fight that Dominic Cruz had 2011 in Washington, D.C. I remember Dominic Cruz was cutting weight, and he looked miserable. He had all the sweats on, the whole bit. And I remember he was laying on the ground at this gym we were in Northern Virginia. I mean, just he could not have looked more miserable. And someone tapped him to see if he could do an interview with me, I think it was. And he was like, you could see him being like, oh, I didn't want to do it. And he just got up and did it. It was incredible. Talking about a true pro. And Cody Garbrandt is the exact same way. They've been on your show. They're out there making the rounds. They're trying to do that thing. And the best part is they both had suits on. And they're both, I guess, white guys or whatever, but that's about their only similarities.
Yeah.
It's a conflation of opposites. It's young, tough, full of vinegar and piss versus Mr. Smooth, Mr. Creative, Mr. Finesse, and when they clash, it is magic.
Love it.
Cody Garbrandt is still in that stage of his career where he's still wearing like that sheen of youthful invincibility. You know what I'm saying? Where he just has no other way to be. He's just had success of what he's doing, and that's what he presents. And now he gets the chance, and that's what's fun about the fight. Besides the stylistic and all, and even like the smack talking, which has been fun, you know, for the most part. Although that was a little awkward, I thought the fight. But I mean,
awkward is good.
Yeah, I mean, but ultimately, I feel like that's what's fun when you have a guy who's been there and literally coming up. I think this March will be 10 years since that Faber fight when Dominic Cruz lost.
Crazy.
10 years, and even though he's had some time off in there, I mean, he's just established himself that much as such a dominant champ. And then you have a guy who's just really believes he's invincible, and he believes he's going to be able to solve the puzzle, and believes that he's a puzzle. He believes he's the puzzle to be solved. I just love that sort of thing.
Destined.
Yes, destined. I mean, those things, those are so fun. Those are those weird crossroads that always make it fun for me. Like when you can look at all those different layers of it and put it all together.
Yeah, I thought that the Fox thing was a bit of a mixed bag. I mean, I hate to be Mr. Contrarian here, but I am like Mr. Contrarian here. But I thought that maybe I'm spoiled by the poetry of Conor McGregor. When McGregor, I'm so used to seeing that guy promote fights in a way that nobody else can match, and maybe it's unfair to put anybody to look at anybody else through that lens.
That house thing?
But Cruz landed had a couple of nice lines, but there was so much of them talking over each other, and then Cruz sort of asking for him to be quiet so I could talk. I was quiet for you to talk. Why don't you talk? And then there was certainly the censored version on the air was just like a stream of like beeping and all that. So it's kind of an awkward, weird thing that if I didn't really know who these fighters were, I'd be like, what the hell's going on here? On the other hand, the good part of it was that it clearly was real. This was not two guys just trying to, look at a script and go at each other with a scripted. They're not beefing in a scripted way.
In other words, it wasn't Chael and Tito fake looking at each other.
It wasn't that. It wasn't. So there was something real there, but I just felt as though it wasn't. It didn't have that. Didn't have the poetry that I love.
Technological limits where it's hard. If you've never been in one of these things, you know it. With the IFP in your ear.
They should have been sitting next to each other. They were in the same building.
Right. When you have the IFP in your ear, there's a delay, and so it causes this guys to trip over each other. It's hard. It's just technologically hard to do. But to the point, putting those two guys together like that, whether it's split screen or even together, is staged. But to Jeff's point, these guys have not changed their tune at all.
Yep.
Cody Garbrandt, I'm going to break his jaw. Dominic Cruz, I'm going to embarrass you with my extraordinary fight IQ. Those themes have been consistent throughout. It got a little bit jumbled in this sort of like word salad that they had on TV, but I was a big fan of it. The uncensored version got out. It was great. And yeah, they tripped up on a few zings, but there was definitely some good material in that.
The Pee Wee Herman tie thing
Dominic Cruz
was pretty awesome.
I mean, Dominic Cruz, when you really step back and think about this side of what he can do, so he's very subtle but very deft at carving his guy up. That you don't even realize until you kind of think about it. You're like, wow, he really he got in a lot of. It's almost like his fighting style. His ability to verbal jab with him it's almost like his fighting style. It's very subtle and cumulative.
Yeah, I bought a house based upon all the wins over your teammates.
Last quick thing on 207. Do you think it is a mistake, considering how big of a fight Ronda Rousey versus Nunes is for the company, to put it on a Friday night? I know that December 31st is a Saturday. The last time they had to do this was UFC 141, Alistair Overeem against Brock Lesnar. They did December 30th card on a Friday to not conflict with New Year's Eve. But I actually went back and looked at the numbers, and we never truly know exactly what the numbers are because they're not public, but Dave Meltzer does a fantastic job. So according to his numbers, 141 did 535,000 pay-per-view buys, and that was the lowest Brock ever did. Now, I can't compare Brock to Ronda necessarily. I think Ronda, mainstream, bigger star, but Brock, prior to 141, 121 against Kane, almost 1 million, 116 against Carwin, over 1 million, 100, over 1 million. I mean, he was a behemoth. And Ronda, 193, over 1 million. 190 close to 1 million, 184 was kind of in the middle, and so when you look at 141, how big of a drop it was for Brock, do you think that this is a dangerous move by the UFC to try to educate people in the next 8 days that this is happening on a Friday and not a Saturday? Is it better to put it on earlier in the day on the 31st so that people get their Saturday night fix, or is it worth the risk of doing the Friday night show?
Well, I don't know if they want to go head-to-head with World Series of Fighting.
That's a good point.
That's certainly
end of interview.
What a stupid question.
We just wrap it up here.
I totally forgot about that.
Aside from wanting to go head-to-head with that card, your point is well taken. They usually like to do shows at the end there or a little bit over, like they've done some shows on January 2nd before.
Yep.
They like to be in that, New Year's Eve
Saturday night, though.
But
they've done January 1st too, by the way.
They have.
Yeah.
But the point being is, if they don't want to do one on what would be the 8th. They don't want to do one on that weekend. They want to do it closer to right around that timeline. So it just puts, given that that's their priority, it puts them in an uncomfortable spot. I will say Ronda Rousey, she didn't just do those million pay-per-view buys. She did them in Brazil and she did them in Australia.
Fair.
Brock did them in North America, if not outright United States. So if anyone can pull in unusual ways, it'd be her.
Okay. Yeah, and Brock Lesnar, like you were mentioning, he was a huge draw, but there was more of the I felt like he was always a crossover into the wrestling realm. We always talked about the wrestling realm wanting to check in on him. It went beyond that, but I feel like for her, especially in a fight like this, it just crosses over way more than that. There's just way more of an appeal. She's established that much. Even though it's been quiet on this, I feel like she'll do a better number than that. I don't know, but I've thought about this too, and I'm not sure. When you look at a Saturday that's New Year's Eve, and you think, would it do better if you move the time? It's still an inconsistent thing with the way they normally do it. I feel like in the long run, in my mind, if I'm watching, I'd rather be on the Friday.
Okay.
Yeah, either way you do it, if you'd have it earlier than Saturday or you have it Friday night, there are going to be people who are going to sit down on their TV on Saturday night and turn on the TV and at that moment realize, if they haven't been on social media, that they blew it and they missed the fights the night before, or they'll wake up Saturday morning and realize that I missed it. So they're gonna, but they are playing to a non-MMA centric crowd. We talked about this promo and how they're not talking to MMA media, they clearly are trying with Ronda to reach that bigger, wider audience that may not be as programmed to always look for a pay-per-view on a Saturday, and a Friday may not throw off those people the same way. I do think, though, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to wake up on Saturday the 31st to read the results and say, oh man, I can't believe it. I thought that was today.
Okay, let's move along. Another big story this week is the UFC trying to put together this interim lightweight title fight between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson. So another interim fight.
Incredibly necessary. Interim.
Out of nowhere,
Might as well add that title.
on Tuesday, I get a call from Jose Aldo, and he says a lot, and we don't have to go through all of it. But he says that he was offered an interim lightweight title fight against Khabib Nurmagomedov, and if you go on Tony Ferguson's Twitter, it's clear that he's having contract issues with the UFC, and Aldo said that Khabib turned down this interim lightweight title fight because he wants to fight Tony Ferguson. And then this story comes out that they offered it to Nate Diaz as well, who tells me it's not true. And oh, by the way, give me $20 million to just answer the phone. There's so much to say about the interim fights and Aldo, who just became the featherweight champion, then being offered an interim lightweight fight because it kind of contradicts the reason why they stripped McGregor in the first place. And the Diaz thing as well. And so the question is a very simple one, like, what do you make of all of this? The idea, once again, this need to make an interim title fight. Ferguson saying, you know, I want to be paid what Khabib is getting. Aldo then being offered the fight, and Ferguson, you know, not being in the picture there for a second, like the UFC willingly moving on. In the words of our friends Ben Folks and Chad Dundas, what's really going on here?
Yeah, the old Dundasso.
Yeah.
Two things. One, it was more than two things, but two big things to me. One is that it is interesting. We talked about it before previously when Chuck was gone on vacation for 7.5 years.
Yeah.
Well rested, I'm sure you are. That look what happens when a champion doesn't defend their title. It creates this absolute disaster behind them. And I think even with the stripping of McGregor at featherweight, that problem has not resolved itself.
But he just won the belt. He just won.
I understand.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily blaming McGregor too much for this, but what I'm saying is Jose Aldo never really got the satisfaction that he was looking for, and now he is still chasing it, and they still feel obligated to him in some kind of way. Remember in your interview, they were like, Jose, we can't make him fight you, you know? So he's doing what he can to just find some kind of solace in his career. I think that's true, and they're trying to gerrymander him in there, and it's not really working. The other thing that's kind of interesting is, you know, in the military, people don't realize this. If they build a tower, let's say an observation tower, they do it to the lowest bidder, right? Who will they pay the least amount of money to build this thing under proper standards? I'm not saying that Ferguson is, I don't know what he's asking for, and I'm not saying it's cheap to pay Jose Aldo, but it also can't be coincidence that Ferguson's like, I want more money, and they're like, you know what? Forget him. Let's just go see if we can get Jose, because we already have a deal with him. We're already obligated for this money. Might as well just use money we already have to pay anyway. See if we can kill two birds with one stone. That, to me, are the two things that are affecting this.
And then again, you have Khabib and Ferguson, much like Diaz and McGregor, kind of fighting in unison, and Khabib saying, I'm not fighting anyone else, right? That's kind of interesting, too, and saying it publicly.
And then you had Max Holloway to this whole thing.
And Max Holloway. Poor guy, I forgot about him. I forgot about him.
It's a disaster because it's like, everybody's saying this guy doesn't want to fight me, and then he'll want to fight this guy, and this guy doesn't want to. You know, it's like this.
Stuck in New York.
So it's gotten really out of hand, and some of these because of Max. Every time you feel like we get a little clarity, because I know this was a big theme in Toronto. It's like we're gonna have some clarity now.
Yes.
It's gonna be super clear. That was Max Holloway's words. We're gonna make it super clear, and Cub Swanson, all these guys, and yet it's super foggy again.
Yeah.
It's like, and it was so left field for me to even contemplate an interim lightweight title fight because it's sort you're basically saying like McGregor's gone for a while, which I know he's having the kid and all that, but hearing in an interview recently, it didn't sound like he was definitively out. It sounded like he kind of was already itching to get back in there. So I don't know, but I will say this: I had never contemplated a Jose Aldo versus Khabib Nurmagomedov fight.
What a fight!
That was fun.
What
Just even to put those names together for a second, and I was like, wow, that was
not
cool.
bad.
It just seems so unnecessary to have these discussions about all this stuff when the fights that need to be made were put there right in front of us. I mean, assuming that McGregor is going to stay out while he becomes a dad, then Khabib against Ferguson, that's a fight. That's the fight you make. Aldo, should be fighting Holloway. If Holloway needs a little bit more time because he needs to heal his foot, fine. Is Tony Ferguson asking for so much that they can't find a way to please him with a contract? I don't think so. I mean, I can't imagine that.
My understanding is he wants equal pay. Basically saying we're both at the same point of our career, we're both equal stars. Just give me what he's getting.
Okay,
and I don't think that's a crazy request, right?
Or at least
You disagree?
It's also considered a starting.
Okay.
It's also a starting point. Just like Nate Diaz asking for $20 million to answer the phone. It doesn't mean he's going to necessarily get $20 million, but if you ask for $10, that's what you're going to end up getting. You might as well ask for more, and then you negotiate. That's the game of the game.
They bring so the interim title is a joke anyway. It's the way that it used to mean something in its original form, but now it's become like a promise ring. I look at it like a promise ring to this guy, or well, you get to fight this, but it's not even that anymore. So each time we clarify with an interim, that person who they were going to fight then goes off somewhere else. I feel like this thing has gotten way out of hand.
The interim title used to be what the number one contender fight was.
Exactly.
What I like about the interim title is that the Khabibs of the world, the Holloways of the world, the Pettises of the world, they get paid more if they fight for a belt, interim or not, fake or not. That's good. I think we can all get behind that.
I understand.
But from a fan standpoint, you're like, what is going on?
It's so inaccessible to understand what the hell is going on at any given point. If you were just to step into MMA right now and be like,
Here's what
what's
they
going
should
on
do.
here?
Just make new weight classes. Just add a few. If you're that desperate, and they're doing it with 145, as crazy as that one is, but if you're that desperate, I think more people will get behind the idea of a, say, as Dan Hardy said on my show on Monday, a 162-pound weight class, a 195-pound weight class, than these interim. Don't you think? I mean, if you're that desperate to have every pay-per-view headlined by a title, make new weight classes as opposed to creating dual champions in each weight class.
You know, I get real uneasy when we're like, we're going to create more interim titles so we can create more weight classes. I'm like, why are we walking the barren path that boxing has laid out for us?
Which they always said they wouldn't do, right?
This seems to me terribly bad strategy. I'm not saying there's not room for some growth, of course, but creating interim titles, and so we can pay guys less, and we can make these things artificial in some kind of artificial way. Let's consecrate that with a new division. That seems like a very bad idea.
Why don't make every fight a title fight?
Title of some kind.
Then everybody gets paid.
3 fight pass title fights.
Like in WWE, you have like the United States champion.
Okay, so speaking of pay and things of that nature, another story that came out on Tuesday was Mark Hunt. This has been a saga since 200, since the 2 failed drug tests by Brock Lesnar. Mark Hunt, it's announced, has agreed, as it was put, to fight Alistair Overeem at UFC 209, that show in March. And then, seconds later, Mark Hunt says, well, yeah, the only way I'm going to fight is if you put this clause that I've been asking you for the last, 4 or 5 months, which is I want all of my opponent's money if they fail a drug test. And he's still saying, by the way, that he wants a cut of Brock's money, which obviously is not going to happen. And I don't even know if the clause is going to happen. But my question to you guys is, how do you feel about the fact that the UFC announces this fight when he's not on board, clearly? He says it's the 4th time they've come to him with a fight. They asked him to fight in Melbourne, in Toronto, in Brooklyn, and now this is the 4th time. Now this is the first time that they come out and say, this fight's happening. Are they putting pressure on him? What's going on?
I don't know. I mean, technically it's not wrong, right? Because the report, as I understand it, was he verbally agreed. I guess that's right. He did. He was like, yeah, sure. I mean, I'll do this.
But there's a huge but.
There's a huge but, of course, and which is, he wants this clause in there. I don't quite understand. I mean, look, what is the UFC doing? I don't know how you can look at it and say they're doing anything but putting pressure on him. I don't know. I mean, what other reason could there be unless they were desperately confused, which I suppose the left hand might not know what the right hand is doing in an organization that big sometimes. Okay, we can at least posit that as a plausible scenario. But just to speak about what Mark Hunt's doing, I don't quite understand what he's making him, okay, how does this work? How does this work, right? So here he sets it up. So who's going to pay this money? So if Alistair Overeem pops, he's going to get the money that the UFC was going to pay Overeem, or are they going to get the amount of money that Overeem still gets his check, but he gets that same dollar amount from the UFC? In other words, either one, he's making the UFC pay costs that they won't even pay Ferguson what he's asking for. They're going to double up on purses. Or 2, who is going to want to sign a fight to Mark Hunt when you can get busted by USADA for taking Celtec from your GNC, and now he gets your purse? He's putting himself in an absolutely terrible negotiating position.
Yeah, there's no way. Okay, And like even the 250,000 of the 2.5 reported, we know Brock Lesnar made way more than 2.5 for 200 because he got pay-per-view points and all that. Even that, like he's saying, like I'm not going to take. Basically, we know it's not going to happen. So then why announce the fight?
I don't get it.
Unless he's going to relent. And at this point, if he relents, if he says, you know what, on second thought, screw all that, it's not a good look because he's really put his foot down, right?
Like maybe that's what they're
hoping
for. I mean, the stiff arm. Maybe that's worked in the past, but I feel like he's been fairly clear. Unless he has different conversations with them that we don't understand. I mean, to me, he's been very clear. He's been on your show a couple of times, and it's been very, very clear what he wants, even if it's unreasonable. He's been pretty clear what he wants. And I feel like, I don't know what the talking between him and the UFC has been, but if he stands by that, I feel like we'll never see Mark Hunt fight again, honestly. There's no way the UFC is never going to accommodate him on any of those levels. So. And honestly, from the UFC's perspective, Mark Hunt was never going to be the big draw at this point. Anyway, he's 42 years old. It's just a weird position. But I do feel like maybe it's a strong arm tactic, like you're saying. That's the only thing I can come up with.
If you're the UFC and Mark Hunt is balking, you announce that fight. And if you're trying to put together a lightweight fight and Tony Ferguson wants our money, well, you let the word get out there that Jose Aldo is up for that fight. I mean, there's certainly there's these guys who run this company now, have done some negotiating in their day, and in the public with people who are in the public eye. So I don't know that it may be new for us to see the way they're doing things, but it certainly isn't new for their business model.
Yeah. Also worth noting as well, this is not new for the UFC, even in the old regime. Remember UFC 170? There was a poster that came out, and I remember it because Gilbert Melendez was right next to me, and it said Gilbert Melendez versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. That was under the Ronda Rousey Sarah McMahon fight, and this was when Gilbert was negotiating, and the fight never happened. And it was kind of the same thing. They put it out there hoping that there's a lot of excitement, and then the fighter kind of looks bad if he walks away. They did it with Cyborg and Jermaine Darondami earlier this year. They did it with Eddie Alvarez.
Dan Henderson and Franklin. Remember they were going to have the rematch when Dan Henderson was going to negotiate his.
Yep. So they've done it. They've done this before. I just I guess I don't like when they do it. Is my point. Like
it
if
becomes
someone's
more
not
and more
board,
conspicuous. If that's really the case, I mean, obviously we're talking about. I feel like people see through it now. I feel like there was a time when maybe you might not have jumped to that immediately. They're saying like, "What is this? Some kind of strong arm tactic?" But you're at a day and age now where that actually people see through it.
I mean, this is more. This is also under that umbrella of promoting. Like we started our whole conversation about how they're promoting the Ronda Rousey fight. To me, this is a bigger promotional sin, and this is a promotional malpractice, to borrow a phrase. To me, this is the malpractice in a real way, in that it damages your credibility. Whereas the other one, the way they promote Rousey and the way they don't promote Nunes, they're cutting off their own opportunity to build something, and that's their business. And I don't care that much about that. But this is something where if they're telling me that this fight's going to happen, and I report that, and then find out later on that fight was just fiction, that makes everybody look bad.
Sure. I think the moral of the story for reporters is if the UFC tells you a fight is going to happen, it's probably best to ask both fighters if they're on board with the fight.
Dana White lied on the record about, remember what happened with Tito Ortiz?
Well, that was the Ultimate Fighter, so I can understand he's trying to protect his reality. I can understand. I'm not in favor of it. I don't love it, but this is totally different, right?
I don't know. Is it?
There's a reality
putting
show
things out in the media just to project an alternate reality?
I get what you're saying. Let's talk about UFC on Fox 22, the show this past Saturday in Sacramento. We talked a little bit about it last week, about the kind of card that it was, and our own Dave Meltzer, reported as well that this was kind of an interesting one for the UFC because it wasn't your typical either title fight or number one contender fight headlining a Fox show. It was really who are the faces and characters that we can cater to the mainstream audience with and try to build, young guns, so to speak, but promising prospects, if you will. And by all accounts, if you just look at the actual ratings, it was a success for the UFC, right? I mean, the gate was good, all that stuff locally, but on Fox, over 4 million, their best ratings in several years on Fox. This seems to be a home run. What's the takeaway now if you're the UFC on Fox? Do you want more of this, or was this just Paige being on Dancing with the Stars, maybe the afterglow of the CM Punk thing, Faber's retirement? How do you decipher this if you're the UFC?
Well, I think partly there's reason to suspect that you don't necessarily. I mean, look, I think we all can agree. We've known for a long time that the idea that putting number one contenders on there and this is some automatic ratings boon or boost to pay-per-view, we've known for a while that didn't work. So on the one hand, I sort of applaud WME, IMG, at least for like breaking the mold. Like they realize like this isn't really working. Maybe there's a better way to do it. There are some potential risks here. Like, are they just going to put people who are manifestly unqualified to even be in the UFC on this? Like, that's kind of what they did here. Like, I like Sage Northcutt a lot. And I would say Mickey Gall's ground game is definitely good enough for the stage. Sage Northcutt is way too early in his career to be in the UFC. It's just a fact, man. Like, he's not a bad kid. He's super athletic. In 2 years, he might be a world beater. But he is so not there right now. And Paige Van Zandt, I think, is coming along, but you got to handle in less than 4 minutes, like, by someone who's really an atom weight. Now, Michelle Waterson's a very good fighter, but it's like, ugh. So they might take some bad conclusions from this about who they're going to put on their cards. I will just say, though, number one, when you come from a good pay-per-view down to Fox, that can do a lot for ratings. We saw that with a bigger case, Holly Holm. We have Mickey Gall coming from the CM Punk fight. That didn't do huge numbers, but very good ones. I think that contributed to ratings. And two, Paige Van Zandt having this visibility, at least, from Dancing with the Stars. The question is, how many times can they replicate this exact formula with what their existing roster is? Right. And the choices get pretty limited, so I'm not all that concerned. I guess we'll just have to sort of see what they do.
What is the next one? I was trying to. Is that the Denver one?
Juliana Pena against Valentina Shevchenko.
Which, by the way, number one contender.
Yeah. Yes. And I mean, to me, I don't know. There's different. I agree with what you were just saying. I think there's different black and white issues you could look at too. Like this was a good-looking card. Like everybody on that main card was a pretty good-looking person.
Oh
too.
And
I feel like
you meant the actual card.
Well, it was a good-looking card in terms of the matchups.
None more so than Mike Perry.
Yes, Mike
with
Perry.
That platinum tattoo. I do like Mike Perry.
Yeah, but I think sometimes that if you're just talking about you're just advertising and you got Paige Van Zandt and the Karate Hottie and this is what the thing and you got Uriah Faber and you're looking at these guys. I just feel like sometimes that's going to translate. This is just the way the world is. I mean, they use good-looking people in every television facet. That's what the deal is. So I feel like in some ways this particular card translated that way. As murky as that seems, I just really think so.
Do you think it boils down to looks?
I think so on a casual stand, like a casual, especially in that main event. Especially in that main event.
I think it could boil down individually. Like in the case of Paige Van Zandt, I do believe that her looks partly contribute to her overall appeal, and among a variety of other things. But I don't think that like casual fans are like, you know what, that's a handsome card. I think what they looked at was like, I recognize Paige Van Zandt. I recognize
like that. But I do think that, you know, if I hate using these things where you get some casual person who texts you something.
I know.
But I did have somebody like, hey, Paige Van Zandt, she's adorable. Right. I had that's exact words, and I was thinking like, how do you even know?
It's true. Go ahead.
And then there is the Dancing with the Stars aspect. Right, I feel like some of that is crossover. I just feel like
that's where I mean that the it's not just attractive. It's kind of somebody who can cross over into something that's in a whole different realm, like Dancing with the Stars. I think that was something that was a big deal. But also the other thing, there's a lot of bigger universe factors that the UFC has to deal with every time they do this. Saturday night, they were up against an NFL game. That's the bad news. The good news is it was a Jets game, and nobody really cares. I mean, it was the Jets against the Dolphins, I guess. It was a bummer of a game, and so they weren't losing that audience. If they were up against a good NFL game, that thing would have tanked. They wouldn't have drawn anywhere near the number. So part of it is, and they didn't know what they were up against when they booked this. You know, when they booked it back in August, their last one, I think there was one that had the worst ratings they've ever had. And that had a better main event in terms of fighters. You know, it was with Demi Maia against Carlos Condit, and it was up against some preseason NFL, but some of the preseason NFL actually preempted the Fox stuff. So it kind of, you know, they really are a prisoner of the rest of what is going on on the sports docket that night. And when they're doing it on the big Fox, it has a huge factor. I will say that you're right, though, 100%. It's going to be impossible to duplicate that sort of card more. I mean, because you're, like you said, you're taking Sage Northcutt and Paige Van Zandt, a couple of fighters who probably are being pushed too quickly, especially Sage. Like you, and you're not going to be able to have that every time. I mean, it's just that was a unique setup, but you know.
The one thing I object to with the whole looks argument, again, I'm not. This is a world where if you're good looking, good things happen to you more so than if you were not attractive. Whatever.
You know from experience. We just did the same joke.
God, I wish.
We just did the same joke.
Yeah, thanks.
You know, I mean, please, are you kidding me? I look like I'm hungover 24/7. Okay, but here's my point. if we were just having a modeling contest, imagine I asked you to assemble a Fox card where just looks were involved. I'm sure some of these players would be involved, but I'm just imagine you did that, and these ones you couldn't be involved. Let's say not picking them, you get a bunch of women to pick all the men, and vice versa. You put together a card, it wouldn't do good ratings. Why? Because or wouldn't do amazing ratings necessarily. Because Paige Van Zandt's popularity, yes, part of it is centered on her look, but that is also centered on what he got in. It enables her to get into the mainstream, that she did well on Dancing with the Stars. To me, this idea that you can just boil it down to looks, I think is it's a very imprecise way of looking at it, and frankly, almost the wrong way.
Sure.
I think the question is, to what extent do these people have, in the case of Sage, this YouTube virality to an extent, and in the case of Paige Van Zandt, this mainstream exposure? Both benefited from their looks, but that's not the sum total of it.
It can't just be that.
No, of course
it certainly
not.
can't.
But it certainly is a line. Like you look at Ellen Chauvin.
Kimbo Slice.
Oh, of course. I'm not saying everybody. I'm just
By
saying
the way,
this
his
particular
look
card.
helped, just in a kind of a
Kimbo
different
Slice
way.
is the most handsome man ever to live. Look at that beard. I'm just saying.
The look helped.
He
The
doesn't
look
have
definitely
traditional
helped. Looks help. Good or bad,
Yes.
looks can help.
Yes.
If looks didn't
But
matter,
the-
Dana White wouldn't be mocking
But look what they did.
Cyborg.
Luke Rockhold versus Lyoto Machida didn't set the world on fire in terms of ratings. The idea that like looks carry you.
I think, to me, the big lesson is the idea that putting number one contender fights or champions on Fox will lead to big pay-per-view numbers, which I think was the initial hope, is not true.
Right.
Just ask Demetrius Johnson, just ask Benson Henderson, and many, many more. It's not equal.
It's funny because we've been dissecting this exact thing for years now on
Yeah.
the show. Like, what should they put on the Fox card? And this is where we're
And
involved.
also putting number one contender fights like Amaya Condit or others, putting title fights doesn't lead to big ratings on Fox. I think they need to look at the Fox platform as, okay, what's the kind of matchup, the kind of fights, the kind of fighters that the mainstream can get behind, that they would be interested in for various reasons. And I said this story on Monday, but Friday night I showed my wife the Fight Mom documentary, and she loved it, the Karate Hottie one. Mm-hmm. She's a mother, she's a wife. I mean, it spoke to her, and she's like, holy crap, this girl fights, she's great, she's so cute, she's crying, this and that. Like, it spoke to her. My wife does not like MMA, will not watch it, just not a fan of it.
Pretty great career choice there.
Yeah, and she decided to leave the house on Saturday to go to this party. First time she leaves since giving birth 2 months ago, and first time she has ever said this to me since I became an MMA journalist. Please tape the Paige Van Zandt Karate Hottie fight for me. I want to watch it. And I was like, holy crap, you actually care? You actually want to watch it? She said, I want to watch it. When she came home, first thing she asked me was, who won? To me, obviously one example, but that in a nutshell is why they are headlining, because they speak to other people. We're going to watch, regardless, the hardcores are going to watch. But those people are out there, and if Fox can grab them, I think that's good for Fox, right?
Certainly agree. Remember when Kat Zingano walked out, first mom to fight in the octagon.
Huge.
These kinds of ways. Now, what you're talking about is a greater way in which that was magnified. But I think that's sort of what I'm looking at. Who has this ability to magnify into the farthest reaches of potential audiences?
Michelle Waterson should get more than 15 and 15 for that, right?
You're right.
That also speaks back to I think the point you might have raised when we were talking about how the UFC is or isn't promoting the Rousey fight, and when you think about Amanda Nunes, the first openly gay champion. I mean, that's a certain audience that might tune into that fight if those folks knew that was a story. I mean, that story has not gotten out there. Also, her, the Brazilian roots. I mean, there are things that, even though I'm not that interested in how the UFC promotes the fights, I don't really care that much because I'm going to be watching it no matter what. I'm interested in the fights, but to speak to that point, I do think that they have to start looking into some of these other avenues as to drawing that audience, and not just focusing on one particular audience.
Okay, let's wrap with this. One of my favorite segments of the year. We look back at the year that was, we look ahead to the year to come. I think we'd all agree on the fact that 2016, without a doubt, no argument, the most newsworthy year in the history of the sport. Is that? I was going to say noseworthy as well.
Noseworthy.
Hello to my friend Dave
Noseworthy.
Yeah. I mean, is there any disagreement here?
No.
It's almost mind-boggling to think about what's happened and how big the stories were and how big the announcements were and the reactions and the aftermath. I mean, you can go on. I think we can all come up with very good arguments for story of the year, right? There isn't a clear-cut winner. But I'm just curious to hear from you guys as we wrap up the year, this being our last show of 2016. What do you think stood out as the biggest story of the year in the most newsworthy year in the history of the sport?
So when I say this, I don't actually mean, it's hard to explain this. My answer is going to be the sale of the UFC. And when I say that, I don't actually mean that day on that Sunday, I think after 200 when we all got home, we're like, whoa.
Yeah.
I don't mean that exactly.
Okay.
What I mean is when they dropped the pebble in the pond, which is what they did with that story, the ripples. I'm watching the ripples in the pond, not so much the dropping of the stone. And what I mean by that is this was a year where one, of course, the sale of $4.2 billion and these new owners and this change of leadership, that was big enough. But to me, the other ripple in the pond that I noticed was when the fighters finally got a sense of worth, a number to look at in the sky, they followed that North Star and they began to push against the UFC machine in a way truly we have not seen before. Be it the continuation of this lawsuit, and I know that happened before 2016, but became more and more a part of it. It continued. Be it guys like Cole Miller verbally speaking out recently. Be it guys like Conor McGregor using the inside channels to get up to the elevator. You're now seeing the integrity of that machine challenged by the fighters themselves and maybe other actors as well in ways we never have. And where that's going to go in 2017 is anyone's guess.
Do you agree that that's
100%.
Okay.
You can go back to our conversation we just had. Nate Diaz, $20 million.
Yeah.
Mark Hunt, not one to fight without these stipulations. Tony Ferguson, battling for it. This is the new, that's what happened. There's a sea change in this whole industry, I feel like, that is very, like you mentioned, it's like a ripple effect. And I think part of that is you're seeing people are airing their grievances way more than they used to. There's an association that is formed, and we'll see where that whole thing goes. You got free agency, which becomes this big story that I think all of it goes into this, though. It all goes into the same idea. I just think it's a general sea change in general, but the sale itself becomes like the exclamation mark, I guess, right in the middle of that whole thing.
Yeah, I would echo that, and also kind of reframe it slightly. Just say changing of the guard. The UFC has new ownership. The way in which the fighters view the UFC, view their job, is different, as both you guys pointed out. And the other aspect of changing the guard, we had 9 new champions in 2016. I'm not counting interims either, because I don't acknowledge interim champions. 9 new champions, and that's a lot. I mean, I went back and looked. 2015 there were 7. 2014 there were 5. So the number has definitely been increasing, and this was a year. And we still might have a new one. We might have a 10th. Well, actually, we might have an 11th.
Yeah.
So we've got the opportunity for 11. If that happens, even if one of those 2 belts change hands, that would mean that twice as many new champions as what happened 2 years ago. That's a significant changing of the guard within the octagon.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's the change of the guard inside the octagon. Stuff you guys are talking about is the outside the octagon changing.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's a change of the guard in the sense too of your matchmaker no longer going to be there with Joe Silva, and you look at some of those integral parts that were there for so long that made it where it is now leaving, and I feel like that just adds the air of uncertainty as to where it goes in 2017.
And the sale itself defining matchmaking. These guys trying to put up interim titles and get these big fights because they have a bill to pay. I think we're going to really pay attention to that in the years to come.
And it's amazing when you look at some of the other candidates, if you will. I mean, the sport was finally legalized here in New York State, and the MSG debut being the success that it was. The mess that was UFC 200 with Brock and John Jones. USADA, from Lyoto Machida to BJ Penn to Brock Lesnar and John Jones, their impact on the sport. Weight cutting and weigh-ins changing almost like overnight, right? I mean, UFC 199, we wake up, it's behind closed doors, and now it's a thing. There's just so many out there. I will say that I agree with everything you guys said, free agency as well. If I could just pinpoint to like one time frame, to me there was nothing more interesting than 196 early March to like early May, that 2-month stretch where Conor loses. And then there's this, what happens now? What the heck is going on? And then there's this thing happening behind the scenes where Conor and Nate are pretty much working in unison but not talking to each other to make the rematch. And the UFC doesn't want the rematch to happen. Conor gets pulled from 200. They make the fight at 200. Conor gets pulled. Nate Diaz shows up to that press conference at UFC 197 prior to it, and the UFC thinks, oh man, we're going to get Conor good. Nate Diaz is going to crap all over him. And then he sides with Conor in front of us all with the empty chair. Remember that? And Dana White is left thinking, like, what is going on here? And then again, reluctantly, they make the fight. Of course, it made them a lot of money, and then ended up kind of working out for them where 200 sold itself and 202, which wouldn't have sold itself, became a thing. that 2-month stretch kind of like talked about all of that. You know, it was so interesting. I feel like Chuck, Jeff, Luke, a book could be written on that 2-month stretch. A 30 for 30 can be done on what happened behind the scenes and how both of them kind of work together, not together, but work together to get what they wanted from the UFC. That's never been done before. Two fighters have never worked together in that regard to make a fight happen that the UFC didn't want happen.
Look at what's happening with Aldo.
Yeah.
They didn't want to pay Ferguson. Oh, we'll just call up Aldo, see if we can get pressure on him or to make this fight or whatever. They're always playing off the other guy. So-and-so gets pulled. Do you want to headline? Sure, I'll headline that card. And this time, these two guys just knew their worth and said, we're going to make it happen.
Amazing, right? Just amazing. But it's just so amazing to me how you can look down the list of all the things from Dominic Cruz coming back and becoming champion to Michael Bisping
and how about
becoming champion. You know?
Also, what about all the great fights? The year started with Lawler versus Condit.
Yes.
A maelstrom of violence. And it just never stopped. It was an insane, insane year.
The retirements of Dan Henderson, Misha Tate as well. Someone else retired recently, whose name is escaping me, but go ahead.
I was just going to say also, you can't forget.
Uriah Faber, excuse me. Uriah Faber.
Right. How about, it's a somber thing, but the deaths of Kimbo Slice, did Ryan Jimmo die this year as well? Yeah. And then Josh Saman. We lost some really important figures as well.
Wow, what a
Jones
year.
disappearing. John Jones disappearing from the sport.
Just when we thought he was back, right? I mean, we ended the year. You know, I got to do that interview with him.
And you hear it like this, and you're like, my God, this sport.
It's insane. I talked to, there's a buddy of mine named Craig Hoffman, who's a radio host in D.C., and he was asking me about MMA, and I was explaining to him, like, there's no union, and this happens, and this happens. And he had to stop the interview halfway through and was like, dude, this is the most insane thing I've ever heard.
The greatest sport to cover.
All these other sports are fairly orderly. Oh, Odell Beckham got fined for his Craig Sager cleats.
Yeah.
That's big news in football. And ours, it's $4.2 billion. It's just craziness. He had to shave his beard. Why are you guys shaving it? It's just madness. It's madness.
And by the way, I don't know if we mentioned this, but how about the rise of the associations, right? I mean, PFA, now the MMAAA. I mean, just the fact that guys, those 5 guys, just the fact that they were able, and guys who are active and fighting in fights in December, that they were, had the gumption to come out and talk about this. That is, a year ago, that was unheard of, right? I mean, that stuff didn't happen. It was always like the disgruntled ex-UFC fighter that spoke about it. Now this is happening.
There's always these layers in there, too, obviously, with Bjorn Rebney. And there
he becomes the return of Bjorn Rebney in that role?
And then the backpedaling Donald Sterling. It's like, that's the stories within the stories, you know what I mean?
Oh, and George St. Pierre declared himself a free agent? This year was batshit crazy.
George St. Pierre announces he's coming back, then declares himself a free agent because they're not letting him come back, essentially, because they can't come to terms. I mean, who saw this coming? It really was. I mean, Rory McDonald's now in Bellator, Benson Henderson. Just think about where we were last year. And things were kind of in order. I mean, Conor knocked out Aldo. Let's see what happens. Jones is coming back. He's speaking up. Look at where we are.
Rousey will be back by July.
Yeah.
She'll be back by July. No big deal.
Chris Cyborg and her saga. Wow.
And to cap it off, Ronda's going to fight the day before New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
The craziness is not over.
That's right. The circus is not done just yet for 2016. Okay, and how about next year? What's the story to watch? What do you think in a year, and this is so hard to predict in this crazy sport, what do you think will be the story of the year in 2017?
Well, I guarantee you, I make a guarantee on this,
Yeah.
this will be wrong.
Okay.
My prediction will be wrong. To your point, I've made predictions in the beginning of years and thought they meant something, and they never really ever. It's just impossible to.
I nailed one.
All right, he got one.
What was it?
It was TRT, wasn't it?
It was the TRT one.
Wow, that feels like.
Yeah, it was like that was a long time ago. I was a young man. I had young dark hair back when I did that.
We brought it up earlier. I think it's going to be, to what extent does the UFC begin to follow the boxing model in terms of creating extra weight classes and extra belts? I really think that's going to make a big, big difference down the line.
Wow. So that's the story to watch.
I think so.
Okay. What do you think about that?
I just think that, in a very black and white sense, it'd be, can they develop any more stars? Because when you look at where we were before Rousey and Conor McGregor came along, it was plateauing a little bit. There wasn't a lot of movement. John Jones was up there still. There was a couple of guys, but they were not that transcendent level. And I feel like when those guys came on, it galvanized the sport again, and it moved it in a lot of different directions. And now it comes down, you have the new ownership and everything that they got going on. Who are the new stars? Are they going to be able to develop stars to that level again?
Yeah. I'll go one word: labor. This is the year. They've started the ball rolling again with a third fighter association start, and we'll see whether they can. I'm not expecting that a year from now we'll be sitting here talking about a fully developed fighter association, but if we're sitting here a year from now and not much has changed, then it's never going to change, because right now this is the time when, like you said, they had active top level fighters who were coming out there and publicly supporting the proposal. And if those people can generate more people and they can get something rolling, even if it's just in progress a year from now, it'll be a big story because the UFC and their ownership needs to make a lot of money, and the fighters now know how much money those guys have made, and they want their piece.
Yeah, could you imagine if this time next year we're saying, remember at the end of 2016 when there were all these associations, what the hell became of that?
Right.
You know, and that could happen. I mean, that could definitely happen. I think you're very much on point, and that kind of leads me to mine. You know, what happens to Conor McGregor? You know, this game being played out. They need Conor to fight. He makes a lot of money for them. And does Ronda Rousey fight again? Does John Jones come back? I mean, to me, when you think about the stars, right, there's no bigger as far as a draw right now than Conor. What the heck happens to Conor? You know, does he fight into? If Conor and Ronda don't fight next year, what kind of a year is that for the UFC, right?
Trouble.
I mean, this game. He did that interview with RTE in Ireland when he won the Sports Person of the Year, and he's like, 10 months. I never said anything about 10 months. Yeah. And like, when is Ari and Patrick naming them, you know, by their names, singling them out, saying, when are these guys going to come talk to me? Not talking about Dana or Uncle Frank, like actually talking about the new guys. When are they going to come talk to me? What happens here? Are they going to, you know, Ari Emanuel is a very powerful, very smart man. Does he say, Conor McGregor, I'm not going to Ireland to talk to you. You come talk to me. And then what happens there? And this is what a fascinating thing. And I think we'll learn more about, you know, Ronda Rousey on December 30th. If she loses, that could be it for her. And how big of a blow is that to the UFC?
I will say that going into 2017 feels like the most uncertain year
it really
we
does.
have entered
it
since
really
I
does.
can remember. Since I followed the sport.
Uncertain, yet after this amazing year of success,
Yeah.
you would never think 4.2 billion sales. Conor
Right.
did this, Ronda did, well, she wasn't here, but you know, and now we're heading into like choppy waters. Like, you wouldn't have imagined that, but
Is the sport better today than it was last year? Has the sport gone better in your eyes? Are we in a better place? The sport is going to turn 24 years old essentially in North America next year, right?
Oh.
Is the sport in a better place?
I feel like what you're doing is you're lifting up the rug and you're doing some deep cleaning now. Like then it's always going to be a process when this goes on. So it feels like it's moving in a direction it has to sustain over the long haul. But I don't know if it's in a better spot right this second, but it seems to be moving that.
Is it trending? Do you feel like it's trending in the right direction, as we like to ask Dana White after the pay-per-views?
I think it's I think it's really tough to say right now. Right now, they're creating, you know, belts that don't mean anything and matchups that don't lead anywhere. And they have one guy who's kind of who's running the show. And if McGregor does take some time off, enough to you know, not only become a dad, but to be around his house with his new family, you know, for a significant portion of this coming year, you know, what's left? What is going to fill that vacuum? So I don't know that I would say that it's in a better place. I think it's in a. I think, you know, Luke used the word uncertain. I guess I feel that that's what's going on right now. There's too much stuff that's going on in the sport that doesn't really have at least meaning for me.
I'll just say this. If you talk to any boxing fan, they wish they had a year like we had.
Yeah.
They wish their year was as interesting or as filled with fights. Their biggest fight, and it was a good fight, Kovalev-Ward. I mean, maybe some of Canelo's fights, but not really, you know.
Which bombed on pay-per-view.
Canelo versus Khan, I mean, this is a joke of a fight, you know. So, you know, for all our uncertainty, which I think is well placed, it's not to say we don't have to have concerns, but the boxing crowd would die to have what we just had.
Yep, that's a great way to end the show because we are so lucky to be covering this sport. I mean, I would not want to cover any other sport just because of all these things happening in front of our eyes, this change. And a special shout out to our longtime fan and viewer, Lorenzo Fertitta, who was smart enough to get out of this racket when he did.
Boy, did he went out.
The smartest man in the room, right?
The plummet or fly, goodbye.
It's unbelievable. That he knew when to say when, right?
Man, you want to talk about, I mean, it's amazing that they live in Vegas.
Yeah.
I don't think he's necessarily a big gambler, but he's in the gambling business. You want to talk about knowing when to fold them? Whoa.
Unbelievable.
Close it out, cashed out, and just, I mean,
Grow your beard.
unbelievable.
Grow the beard, yeah. Nobody's telling him to shave his beard off.
That's right. All right, that does it for us. What a year it has been. Thank you so much for watching. I think the show has come a long way in 2016. We can't thank you enough each and every week when we do the show that you've, you know, spent some time with us and sent us feedback, all that stuff and more. It really is appreciated. So we're off next week because of UFC 207. Luke and I will be there, but we'll be back the following week to wrap up what should be a wild week in Las Vegas. So it's a short break for us. We're not going away for a long time. do not worry, we'll have plenty of coverage over in Las Vegas. For now, we'll say goodbye. For Luke, Chuck, Jeff, I am Ariel. Again, thank you so much for watching. Happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. We'll see you in 2017.